If you want to help out and support the channel, there are a few things you can do. Go check out Flipside Gaming and use the promo code VOIDMAGE in all caps. This will get you 10% off all orders $10 or more. And if you go shopping on tcgplayer.com, go use my affiliate link in the description below. That way all purchases you make will go towards helping the channel. And lastly, go check out my Patreon. It's a more direct way that you can help the channel while also getting some more interaction. I appreciate all of your support. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Commander Deck Tech video. This time we're going to welcome new patron Cody. For the monthly Deck Tech tier, Cody has requested for December that I make a deck that utilizes the Devoid Eldrazi from Battle for Zendikar. That block naturally added more synergies for Eldrazi cards, and Devoid pretty much just made Eldrazi's colorless regardless of whether or not they had a color in their mana cost. Cody also has a request that I don't use any cards that cost more than $10. I'm going to rarely push that limit. There might be a couple cards that might be a little bit more than $10, but for the most part it is not going to be above 10. My commander of choice for the Devoid deck, to be honest, it kind of has to be Vela the Night-Clad. Even though she is not an Eldrazi herself, you have probably the perfect commander to fool around with colorless creatures, seeing as she gives all of them intimidate. She has intimidate herself, but it's more important that your colorless creatures have it, because then they can't be blocked except by artifact creatures. Since the Devoid creatures don't have color, those are pretty much the only things that can block it. She also has another ability I'm not going to completely ignore, but it's not going to be the focus of this deck like it would for some other decks. Whenever she or another creature you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. There are some combos that we're going to fool around with, but it is for the most part going to be a deck built around taking advantage of swinging with unblocked Eldrazi's. Starting off here with the lands, we are obviously going to have more colorless friendly lands. Lands that are going to give us colorless specifically. We have Corrupted Crossroads. We could pay a life to add 1 mana of any color, but it has to be spent on a spell with Devoid, which is a lot of creatures in the deck. Eldrazi Temple is going to give us 2 colorless, but we can only use that for Eldrazi's or activated abilities of Eldrazi's. Eye of Ugin is going to make our Eldrazi spells cheaper, but we can also sack it to search for another creature. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods is kind of like Eldrazi Temple, but I think a little bit more flexible because it can be used on any colorless spells. We have Spawning Bed. If we want to pay 6 mana and sack it, we can give ourselves 3 of those Eldrazi Scion tokens. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon will allow us to gain some life. We are playing over 40 creatures in the deck, and just about all of them are colorless. And we have some blue-black lands that are also going to tap for colorless, Tainted Isle, and Underground River. So we don't just want to play our Eldrazi, we want to be able to play our Vela. We also need some other ramps, so we're playing the obvious Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Dimir's Signet, Talisman of Dominance, Mind Stone, Worn Power Stone, Hedron Archive, and Thran Dynamo. We have some activated abilities that are going to require colorless mana, so if you were wondering why we are playing more artifact ramp, that is a good reason to. We also have some creatures that are going to contribute to mana. We have Cultivator Drone. It can tap to add 1 colorless mana, but we can only use it on a colorless spell or an activated ability of a colorless permanent. We have a Palladium Mirror, which isn't an Eldrazi, but it's a colorless creature that can tap for 2 mana. Solemn Simulacrum is a nice card to have because it's, again, another colorless creature, but it will give us a land. And although it's considerably worse than Palladium Mirror, Kozilek's Channeler is an Eldrazi, which could come in handy if we have tribal-specific cards for Eldrazi's. And although it's not ramp, it's just cost reduction, it's pretty good. Conduit of Ruin and Ugin the Ineffable. Since the majority of our deck, we're going to have Eldrazi's, making them 2 mana cheaper is going to speed up the deck a bit. And we also need some ways of speeding up the deck with good card draw. And 2 cards that are perfect for this deck, since our creatures are going to be mostly unblockable, Bident of Thassa and Coastal Piracy make it so that we can draw a card whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to an opponent. The Bident obviously being a little bit better because we can tap it to force our opponents to attack with their creatures. We also have this in Eldrazi form with the cards Smothering Abomination and Deep Fathom Skulker. Skulker being pretty much exactly the same as Coastal Piracy and Bident of Thassa. So those are basically cards that reward us for attacking with our creatures, dealing damage, mostly because they're unblockable. But real quickly, I'm just going to go through all of the Eldrazi. Most of them are in here just because they're colorless. They have the Devoid, Prophet of Distortion, just a 1-cost creature, but an activated ability of 4 mana to draw a card, which can be pretty underrated. It's a decent mana sink late in the game. Salvage Drone just has the ingest mechanic, which if it deals damage, that player has to exile the top card of their library. Also lets you loot when it dies. Sludge Crawler is kind of the same thing, but it has an activated ability where we can make it a little bit bigger. Bearer of of Silence has a cast trigger where we can pay 2 more mana, and if we do, an opponent has to sacrifice a creature. Blinding Drone is a pretty cool card. We can pay a colorless and tap it to tap a target creature. Culling Drone has Ingest, and it's a 2/2 for 2. Dimensional Infiltrator is a pretty decent card. Has kind of a way to protect itself. We can pay 2 mana. Target opponent exiles the top card of their library. If it's a land card, we can return Dimensional Infiltrator to our hand. Eldrazi Mimic pretty much can mimic whatever Eldrazi we have that enters the battlefield. That is until end of turn, but it could still be a pretty deadly card. Fathom Feeder, Devoid, Death Touch, Ingest, pretty cool keywords, but also has an activated ability where we can pay 5 mana and draw a card. Each opponent will also have to exile the top card of their library. Mist Intruder, another good ingest creature, this time with flying. Slaughter Drone has an activated ability where it can gain Death Touch until end of turn. Benthic Infiltrator also has ingest, but cannot be blocked. Dominator Drone, if we have another colorless creature, each opponent will have to lose 2 life, also has ingest. And Eldrazi Sky Spawner makes one of those Eldrazi Scion creature tokens that we can sack to add a colorless. Mind Melter can't be blocked. We can pay 4 mana and target opponent exiles a card from their hand. We can only do it sorcery speed, but that's pretty deadly. Ruination Guide, other colorless creatures we control get +1 power. Incubator Drone creates another one of those Scion tokens. Murk Strider, we can return a card an opponent has in exile back to their graveyard so that we can return target creature to its owner's hand. Sifter of Skulls, whenever another non-token creature we control dies, we get one of the Scion tokens. Thought Harvester, whenever we cast a colorless spell, target opponent exiles the top card of their library, which is going to be quite often. Ulamog's Nullifier enters the battlefield. We get to put 2 cards our opponent owns from exile into their graveyard to counter a spell. Blight Herder, we can put 2 cards our opponents own from exile into their graveyard. If we do, we put 3 of those Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. Ulamog's Reclaimer, we don't have too many instants and sorceries, but the ones we have are pretty powerful. When it enters the battlefield, we get to do pretty much the same trick. Return a card an opponent has in exile back to their graveyard. And by the way, it shouldn't be too hard. We have a lot of those ingest creatures that are exiling cards. This is pretty much an Archaeomancer. It's going to get us back an instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. Drowner of Hope is going to make more of those Scion creature tokens, but we can sacrifice one of them to tap target creature. Endbringer is a pretty sweet mana sink. It untaps during each other player's untap step. We can deal a damage to target creature or player. We can pay a mana and tap it so that target creature can't attack or block this turn, or we can pay 2 mana and tap it to draw a card. Really why it's important to have colorless sources. Oblivion Sower, pretty sweet card. Hopefully we can steal some of our opponent's lands. Sire's Stagnation, kind of like the Consecrated Sphinx of Eldrazi's. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library and you draw 2 cards. Steel Hellkite. Since it's going to be unblockable in this deck for the most part, it shouldn't be a problem dealing damage with it, so you can use its ability and get that awesome removal. Bane of Bala Ged has kind of a pseudo-annihilator ability. When it attacks, the defending player exiles 2 permanents they control. Artisan of Kozilek does have Annihilator, but it's just as important to play it so you get to return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Void Winnower is another 9-cost Eldrazi. Our opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs, and our opponents can't block with creatures that have even converted mana costs. The last Eldrazi is Kozilek the Great Distortion, probably one of the most powerful Eldrazi's you can play that's under $10. Awesome cast trigger. If we have fewer than 7 cards in our hand, we draw cards equal to the difference. Also has Menace, but the coolest thing is that we can discard a card with converted mana cost X to counter a spell that has converted mana cost X. Very powerful card, especially once we have a full hand. Another part of the deck is taking advantage of Vela the Night-Clad, and there's a couple ways that we can do that. If we're focusing on being able to deal damage, we can fool around with Cypher. Cypher was a cool mechanic back in Gatecrash, I believe, where after you play the spell, you exile it and then encode it onto a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to cast a copy of the encoded card. So we have Midnicht Recovery. We get to return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Once we cipher this onto a creature, every time we deal combat damage, we get to copy, so we get to do this all over again. Voidwalk is a blank card. Exile target creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, which can be useful with some ETB cards. And Stolen Identity is probably the most powerful because we can create a token copy of any artifact or creature. Cypher is pretty cool, but we also have a Dowsing Dagger. We're giving an opponent 2/0/2 green plant creature tokens, which isn't really good, but since our creatures are going to be unblockable for the most part, we can deal damage with it pretty easily, flipping it into Lost Veil, which will tap to add 3 mana of any one color to our mana pool. Pretty good ramp. The last part of the deck is Abuse of Vela specifically. Her last ability is pretty deadly. And Blade of Selves is a ridiculous card, giving the equipped creature Myriad. So whenever that creature attacks, you get to put a token that's a copy of the creature into play, attacking your other opponents. So if you have 2 other opponents, you're going to have 2 copies of Vela. There is the legendary rule, which is why this is a combo. Both of the Velas that are attacking the opponents you're not attacking with your original Vela are going to be sacrificed to the legendary rule, but they will also have their triggers. They're going to be leaving at the same time, so 3 Velas are going to trigger for both Velas that are leaving. If we're allowed to keep doing this, that's going to be a lot of life loss. If that's not enough for you, we also have Rite of Replication. If you kick it, you get to put 5 token copies of target creature onto the battlefield. Since the legendary rule is still going to apply, that's going to be even more life loss for your opponents. Around 30 life loss total. 6 Velas are going to trigger for 5 that are leaving, so that's about 30. Probably one of the best cards in the whole deck because of that. But anyway, that's going to do it for the deck. Thanks again, Cody, for becoming a new patron. Vela is always one of those commanders I want to play with more often. There's just something about blue and black that I don't typically find interesting. Vela is one of those few options that, because you can fool around with Devoid, it just makes it worthwhile for me. You all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you next video. Just wanted to say thanks to the patrons who are supporting me on patreon.com. Go check it out. There are different tiers with their own rewards. One of them is having your name in the credits of my videos. I know it's not much, but it's something that I can do to show my appreciation. Thanks again, and have a good day.